Hello, happy Wednesday everybody, and welcome to my tea table. I am Elise, and today we have a Constitution study group. Every Wednesday we get together on my live stream and we talk about the Constitution. We try to understand these infrastructures and systems that we work within, and most importantly, we talk about being more civilized, because ultimately that is what a constitution is about. That is what our community is about. Hey Kayla, good to see you. Happy Wednesday. Today I'm talking about consensus. This is going to be a really good topic. I'm feeling very passionate about this topic today. So I look forward to seeing what we learn together. So if you guys decide to stick around, let's have some fun. Let's learn. Let's get a little smarter. Let's get a little more polite. Let's do what we can to make our world better. I will be drinking some tea today. I'll get that started up real soon. And we're going to be listening to some cool jam music, because I figured nothing says consensus more than a jam. Yeah, I hope you guys are doing well today. I hope your week is going well. Here in Vegas, we are enjoying another day of beautiful weather, so I'm so grateful for that. The sun is out. And there's lots of joy to be felt, that is for sure. If you guys are joining me from the live stream online, yeah, Kayla, go enjoy your walk. I look forward to seeing you when you come back. I plan to be going for a while. I have quite the book to reference today, so we can be here as long as we want to be here. Yeah, I look forward to hearing what you guys all have to think and say about consensus and about the government's role in understanding consensus and doing its best job to protect our democracy, considering that consensus is a key element of that. Yeah, I'm finally graduating to the book that was first introduced to me when I first started explaining to my mentor. I'll call it my mentor. I first started explaining my interests in understanding politics more, understanding government more, and this was the book that my mentor gave to me. My mentor is has an advanced degree in international law and has her own personal interest in politics and whatnot. And this was the book that was introduced to me. It's a heavy one. It's a dense one. It's actually a collection of several different lectures. So it is, quite easy to handle. The content is hard. And I'll say this book was given to me a year and a half ago, which is before I started doing this Constitution study group. And I have to say that in that time, and with all of the studying and the reading that I've been doing, as elementary as it's been seeming, if you've been here for the Constitution study groups, I feel like now when I pick this book up and look at it and read, I am absorbing and understanding on my first go around reading things. So there's some positivity, Sometimes my mentor especially has been kind of critiquing this Constitution study group as being too elementary. And I say, you know what, sometimes you just need to start out with the simplicity before you can jump right into the deep stuff. So yeah, this is a book called Political Liberalism, and written by a fellow named John Rawls, who is highly regarded in, the legal academic space. And he talks a lot about consensus in this book, like this whole concept, and I'll go and we'll check out the Wikipedia page on this book before I start opening it up and trying to read any of this with you guys, because it's pretty heavy. And so until then, I'm going to drink some tea. I will, of course, talk about the tea I'm drinking, so if you have any questions about what I'm doing at my tea table or about what I'm drinking, feel free to ask those questions. This segment on Wednesday afternoons does not need to be exclusively about the Constitution or about government or about civility or any of those things. You like that, civility? Yeah, Kayla, I appreciate the elementariness of it too. Not everything has to be sophisticated, and it's almost like whenever you put that exclusivity on sophisticated content, or it's only worthy of our adult education unless it's sophisticated, putting that taboo on elementariness really holds us back, because then it makes things like this book inaccessible to everyday people. So sometimes you just gotta start with the elementary steps. Go ahead and say hi if you're here. If you guys are here on the live stream on Twitch or Facebook, you will notice that I'm serving tea outside the boardroom. Of course, this group of folks behind me are all working really hard to find some consensus. I don't know what they're talking about. That's their meeting, but I just thought it'd be a really great place to stream today from, so that we can see consensus building in action. Yeah. See you soon, Kayla. Enjoy your walk. I hope it's sunshiny and bright and beautiful there for you on your walk. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on drinking my tea. Let me give you guys a cool view so you can easily keep up with me. Here we go. Let me get this a little straight for you guys. You guys get the overhead view of the tea table. Of course, if you guys are on Instagram and would like to join me on the live stream on the computer, or of course you can view the Facebook Live video or YouTube video or Twitch video from your phone. So whatever's more comfortable, but you can just go search Tea Lit Tea online and you will find me live there. You'll get a better view of my tea, basically. Of course, I will show you on Instagram if that's more convenient for you. So I'm, as always, starting out with priming all of my wares, getting everything warmed up and ready for my tea service today. Today I will be drinking a 2019 Sheng Pu'er from Yunnan, China, from Nanoshan. Still trying to dig through all the rest of those gifts that I had from a couple of years ago, from last time I went to Nanoshan. This vintage filter is making it a little bit more challenging to see the tea, but I hope you can see it. Beautiful tea. I didn't weigh this out, but I eyeballed it. It's probably about 4 or 5 grams, all going into my Gaiwan, made by Marie and Patrick at Handmade, or Marie's Tea in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Maybe if we're lucky, we'll have them stop by and chat with us. Happy February to everybody. Can you believe that? The whole month of January just went like this. I shouldn't say it. It didn't necessarily just flash by just like that, but in some senses, sometimes it does feel that way. But we're getting through. We're getting through this year. We're getting through this pandemic. You know, if you keep your eyes on the numbers of the pandemic and the growth and everything going on, we are finally starting to see some relief, which is awesome. All right, should be ready to decant my tea. I've been brewing it for about 40 seconds here. This is the first steep. I'm not going to rinse this tea. This tea was gifted to me fresh. It was coming from a trusted friend, artisanal tea maker, so I trust that it is clean and ready to drink on its own. And go ahead and use this for my wastewater. I'm drinking some tea. Let me get a little white paper here so you can see that color. How beautiful and clean that tea looks. Very clean. I didn't use a filter, so that's why you're seeing a couple of those little pieces in there, but overall very clean liquor here. And the aroma, as expected, is quite earthy, but so sweet. Oh, so sweet. Like the aroma of sweet, sweet, fertile soil, you know? So this is unaged Sheng Pu'er, so that's why the light color. It hasn't been aged. It hasn't started to darken, which happens over time. You know, maybe 15 years from now, you might see this turning into a darker brown color, but for now, it is, and as usual, I want to put my disco ball right in the center of my cup. Get a little party in my teacup. This is good tea. Nutty, hearty. Like it gives something for my palate to grab onto, which is always an indicator of good tea. If you enjoy drinking it, if it's pleasant to drink it. Now on the aftertaste, I am getting a little bit of that like licorice, type of sensation, but in a good way, not in any kind of bitter way. I'm not getting any bitterness out of this tea. Only sweetness, softness, and that like earthiness to it, but in a positive way. So funny, you talk to tea drinkers and we're always talking about how tea that tastes like earth tastes good. And people that aren't familiar with that may say, what? I never imagined the mud to taste very good, but sometimes. Sometimes. All right, so I will get a second infusion in now. Check the temp on my water. All right, I'll boil that again. My water had dropped down to about 175 degrees Fahrenheit, and I want to get that back up to boiling again. So good. It's like, even when I move my tongue around within my palate, even after I've swallowed the tea, it's just like my tongue can even feel it. It's like this thickness that's coating all of my palate. Energetically, the tea is helping me. I just had quite a heavy meal with my friends Jenny and Sheridan at Everygrain in downtown Las Vegas. I had some beef noodle soup, which is so delicious, so good, and some scallion pancakes. So a little bit of a heavy lunch. So this is the perfect tea to drink to help my body, specifically my digestive system, process all of that. Especially the, oily food. Chinese food can be quite oily. And that's why they drink so much tea after they eat. You think of dim sum, which dim sum in Hong Kong culture, which is where dim sum culture originated, the term dim sum means to drink tea. And so the dim sum experience is actually about the tea. It's like the other things that you eat are to go with the tea. And they typically drink fermented pu'er tea, the shu style of pu'er tea, which is going through an accelerated fermentation process. But it's still the same type of fermentation process that would happen to this type of pu'er tea if we were to allow it to ferment naturally. They just do it in the factory and have developed techniques for accelerating that process. So it goes from taking 10 to 20 years to taking just a few months. Which for business, if you ever run a business and know how time waits and all of those things work in business, it's always more efficient in business to reduce lead times and get the product ready for market sooner rather than later. All right, so I'm gonna do my second infusion decant now. Again, not using the filter. I could use the filter, but these leaves are so full that there's not, a bunch of little chunks in here. So there's really not a lot of things to filter out. The lid is more than enough to hold back the leaf when decanting. Yet another very clean, crisp, vibrant infusion there. Looks delicious. I wish you guys were here. I could pour you a cup. I'd love to do that. All right, so let's get back to the boardroom. boardroom. Here we are in the boardroom. Looks like they're discussing something very important. And, that's usually the goal in any business contract, in any board meeting you may be having, is to have a roundtable discussion and come up with agreements on how to move forward, coming up with consensus. And let's start by first trying to understand what we mean by consensus. My favorite thing to do, as always, is to hit the dictionary. Always love the dictionary. Again, with the elementariness, it's good. We're all adults here. We're more than welcome to think of things in very elementary terms. It's actually very good for us. So, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the definition of consensus, which is a noun, often attributive, means general agreement, unanimity, unanimity. I always have trouble with that word. Or the judgment arrived at most of those concerned. So both of those definitions are associated with some type of majority vote, majority opinion, being consensus. And then the second definition is group solidarity in sentiment and belief. And for the purposes of today's discussion, and I would believe for the rest of any discussion that I'm having in the context of TLET and the business model that we have here at TLET, this would be the definition that I'm most referring to. And again, that is group solidarity and sentiment and belief. So the first definition was like the majority of people, like what do the majority of people think? That's consensus, that's how we do votes now. When we do a literal vote where everybody's vote is taken and counted, that would be that definition of consensus, how we come up with our voted in political leaders. That would be consensus. But and once you're voted in, and this is the definition of consensus that I really want to focus on in this stream, is once a politician, a representative is voted in, or even someone within the judiciary branch, a judge, or even the executive, but mostly it's referring to representatives and people within the judicial system. Once they're voted in, and they're voted in through the first definition of consensus, which is the majority of people, what they chose to go in. Once they're in that position of power, they then represent everybody, even the people that didn't vote for them. And they're still meant to make their decisions based upon consensus, based upon what is the best decision to represent and protect their constituents who voted them in, who they represent. And regardless of how you fold it or look at it, that consensus, even in a figurative sense, has to exist, right? Group solidarity and sentiment and belief, because ideally a representative or someone within the judiciary branch needs to be making decisions for the entire group, almost creating that solidarity for them. So it's a tricky thing, and this whole stream and everything that I'm doing here today is all based off of a conversation I had this morning. I've been dealing with some frustrations with several things. I mean, the article that I read last week, if you were here last week, you may have remembered, but if you weren't here, I will just give a very brief synopsis of it. But I read an article about a situation, a very violent situation that happened in tea fields in Kenya. And I was very frustrated, not with the tea company or the actual violence that happened, but I was more frustrated with the governing bodies and the political bodies that have been asked to step in and intervene in the situation that have chosen not to do anything. And I thought, well, at least they've chosen not to do anything publicly right now. I'm sure there's things happening behind the curtain, behind what you can read in news articles that I would never know. And so, but I can still be frustrated. I'm frustrated with the information that is available to me through that news article that I shared, where it was the UN in particular that had been asked by the victims of this story to step up and do something about it. They didn't pointedly say what they wanted the UN to do about it, but they have asked the UN to step in and get involved, and they didn't. And they are actively choosing not to comment on the situation. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of political stuff of why that's going on and the delay in action. But it just made me think, even in other governing bodies, including our federal government here in the United States or any other federal government, about what is the job of the government and how can they represent consensus or represent what's best for the community when there are other outside influences affecting them, like these political influences with the UN, which in the article was pointed out that the company in question had increased their direct donations to the UN. How many times was that? 2 times 10? 20 times. They had increased their annual contributions to the UN 20 times what they usually contribute. It went up from $50,000 a year to $1 million a year of contributions. So there's obviously some conflict of interest. And so this conversation I was having with, it's a mentor of sorts, and their question to me was almost a position of devil's advocate, and really challenging me to put myself in the position of those lawmakers or of those policy enforcement agencies, such as the UN, to make the best decision. And it came down to consensus. I said I would, if I was in those positions, I would think, being in that position, that I would do everything in my power and ability to recognize that consensus and make the decisions based off of that. And the response I got was that consensus is impossible. Group solidarity and sentiment and belief is impossible, which I believe is true, actually. And in the raw sense, that if there is one single sentiment, one single belief that everybody agrees in to their core and everything they are, that is like the total opposite of what a democracy is. So I understood that argument, but in the core of my use of that term consensus, I still think it's very possible. And I remembered when my friend gifted me this, well, he didn't give, I'm borrowing this book. The gift was letting me borrow this book and giving me time with this book to sit with it and read it. Because when I first read the book, well, I didn't finish it completely. I read the introduction and the first chapter, which, are very, well, the first lecture that's in here is very dense. I had read about that much of the book when I first read it. I went to Mexico, sat on the beach, and I read this for a week, which was great. That was good fun. And when I first read it, as I said before, I didn't grasp everything right away. In many of the parts, I had to read multiple times so that I could really understand what the writer was saying. But the terms of consensus and the ideas around consensus, I do remember that was brought up a lot in this book, and so that's what triggered me to pull this book out and start referencing it here in these Constitution study groups. And I kind of see that as a little bit of a graduation to the next step, which is great. It's exciting. It always feels good to graduate to the next step. Next level of maturity. Power up. Power up. And so I'm going to, read some out of this book. But before I do that, I wanted to Well, actually, before I do that, there were some other articles that I do want to check out. So specifically, there's this article published in the University of Michigan Law School titled, it's a big one. We're not going to read the whole thing. Don't worry. I am definitely not reading the whole thing of this. It is titled Public Consensus as Constitutional Authority. And it was really one of the few articles that I could find where, there's a direct tie between understanding consensus and, what the Constitution has to do about it. Of course, this is a Constitution study group, so I thought that this would be, something good to look at and see if there's anything to learn from. So, like I said, this is a very large article, so I've already kind of gone through it. I didn't read all of it, but I went through it and I found some specific portions that I think will be useful for us to go. And hi, Rabbit of Tea, good to see you. Welcome to my stream. You're joining me on a Wednesday afternoon, which means I'm doing a Constitution study group. Of course, I'm drinking some tea. Today I'm drinking some 2019 Shangpur from Nanoshan. This was a gift from some tea maker friends. It's not a tea that I sell. Very special, limited edition Gushu cha. It is delicious and also sweet. I'm about to get into my third infusion here. So Rabbit today, which I do every week, a Constitution study group where we read the Constitution and talk about civility and how we can be better civilized and getting along with each other. And today's topic is on consensus. Do you believe that... So first of all, here's the question. Do you believe that consensus is possible? And then the second question, do you believe that consensus is important for democracy to be protected by our government? And that's mostly not through the executive, but through representatives and the judiciary branch. Do you think that consensus is possible? And you are welcome to be as optimistic or as pessimistic as you like. I'm just trying to see people's viewpoints on consensus, and I'll be referring to a book today. It's a big book, so don't worry. I'm not gonna bust it out on you right now at this moment. I'll ease us into it. But this is a book called Political Liberalism, written in the early 1990s by a law professor who had done several lectures. The book is actually a collection of his lectures around the theory of political liberalism, which addresses consensus and addresses ways that we can see the words. I love the words that he used to coin it, which is reasonable comprehensive doctrines. Reasonable comprehensive doctrines. So we live in a diverse culture. Heck, we're sitting here at a tea table drinking Chinese tea from US made tea wares that are influenced by Korean arts and essence of Japanese culture as well, all mixed together. So duh. We have different doctrines and different perspectives that we're working within, but yet we still have to get along with each other, So I really appreciate, the theories behind this, and I'm going to start digging into that. Been doing this study group for almost a year now, every week. We've gone through all the basics. We've gone through the Constitution, obviously, and read through several different Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers to understand specific elements of the Constitution, why they were written, and what they mean, especially within the historical context that they were written. And now we're kind of evolving to modern thought and modern platforms that we can work within. So Rabbit says, I do. I really believe the collective of humanity, especially in regards to our Constitution, are really trying to make the representation of this document in people's life to work as hard and as best as possible for the good of everyone. So yeah, you believe that consensus is possible. Now, I just spent some time in the dictionary looking at the word consensus. There's two definitions. So the first one, which has two different definitions within it, is general agreement. And the second one, which gives a little bit more context to that, is a judgment arrived at by most of those concerned. So that's consensus in the sense of like voting. And then the other definition, and this is more so the definition that I'm really focusing on in the study group, is group solidarity in sentiment and belief. Now, if you take that definition literally, you could say that consensus is not possible because, yeah, we have different perspectives, different viewpoints, different values and religious beliefs and spiritualities. So, yeah, we definitely couldn't agree on one sentiment or belief. It will take a lot more work. Yes, it will. You are right. But hey, we've got time, we've got energy, we are young, enthusiastic, and we're drinking good tea, which really helps. And that's why I kind of feel like the tea community and people that practice Kung Fu Cha, people that practice connoisseurship, even outside of tea, but connoisseurship is this like heightened level of mindfulness and also open-mindedness of opening perspectives and understanding that there are other perspectives that aren't your own that affect our viewpoints and whatnot. So I feel like tea people and connoisseurs are at this heightened level of readiness for activating this within their communities. So I totally encourage tea lovers in particular to step up civic engagements and really spread this ethos. And you know what's cool is that it has nothing to do with politics. It has absolutely nothing to do with politics. It's just how to do with increased mind perspectives. And as us as individuals then go and handle our politics, we go vote or we go talk to our representatives or whatever we're doing in our political engagement, we'll be better prepared. We'll be more educated. We'll make better decisions. You know, a true democracy and a true civilization can be realized. Rabbit, thank you so much for joining. I was in one of your streams last week. I chatted with you, I'm sure you remembered. And yeah, I thought it was really interesting what you were speaking on, and I would love to speak with you more about that particular topic, about getting tea into the cafe environment, because I almost feel like it's related to what I'm talking about today. That, like, you know, you're going into the business trying to offer them a elevated experience that it just may be pennies more expensive than what they're currently serving, which you addressed in your talk. But it's like a friggin' wall. It's like talking to a wall. It's like pennies more, no way, I can't listen. And there's like this huge culture gap there. And I think it's like, it's very similar to this culture political gap that we're currently trying to solve. Yeah, it's interesting. I got criticized the other day by a follower who went out of their way to send me a message to tell me that they unfollowed me because they felt like this particular series that I do on Wednesday, they had joined in and they felt like it was inappropriate for me to be talking about politics. And I was like, geez, man, I wasn't talking about politics. I was talking about civility, I was talking about civilization, I was talking about kindness and, you know, how all of those things for us work within political systems. But it was interesting. It's an interesting perspective. And it's interesting because then last week I read an article about a situation in Kenya where tea field workers, part of Unilever's business group, which is Lipton, their 32,000 acre tea farm in Kenya, dealt with some major political violence, like direct political and violence, where even management of the company incited violence and allowed this political violence to come in, and people died. People died, workers lost their housing, and the victims are trying to hold the company accountable. And the company is saying, the UK company especially, but even the Kenyan branch of the company, the subsidiary, is saying that they are not responsible for that political violence. It was out of their power. They didn't know about it. And I was just thinking the whole time I was reading the article is like, okay, so that is a tea company getting involved in politics. Like me hosting a constitution study group, like, yes, it may feel like it's political. It may feel like it's inappropriate. It's like, just talk about tea. Don't talk about politics, or don't talk about how government works. But it's like, we need to, because there are even speed bumps and bottlenecks involved in getting good tea, making tea, not even good tea, just regular tea. There are bottlenecks where the government is in there, and the influence and the power are exploiting political influence in order to accomplish those things. So, if we're going to be good tea lovers and tea businesses, because most of what I do is wholesale. Most of what I do is, I'll send you the article. It's a great article. It's kind of sad. It's really sad to read, and it's not short. It's a very long article, but it's important. I think anybody who's in the tea business should read these types of articles to really understand the political and economic climate for tea producing regions, and not because we need to instigate some kind of cancel culture. We don't need cancel culture. Like, that business model is already dying on its own. Like, we don't need to kill it. Like, it's already killing itself. But as people in the business, it's important for us to understand the foundations of these places and these communities and how the businesses work there and the industries work, because we're still going to work with them, into the future. And so we need to understand, historical traumas and generational issues that are going on in these communities, because our goal is to help those people become tea masters, become specialty tea makers, once the Unilevers and the Liptons leave their territories, because it's no longer profitable. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you're bringing up the topic of human trafficking. It's a big one. I was talking to earlier at lunch today. I had a meeting with somebody about the political nature of tea, and this is a wine expert, someone in the wine business, and they are very familiar with the political struggles in the wine industry here in the States, like wine sales, not wine production so much, but like the sales of wine and spirits is hugely political. It's hugely like organized crime. She was like, I was like, yeah, like tea is even more intense than that. Not here in the States, but you go to India, you go to these other places, and you're talking about an industry that is like the source point of human trafficking. It's like, who are they going to traffic if there's no oppressed people to prey upon, to traffic? And the tea industry for a long time in places like Sri Lanka and Nepal and India, like the Assam area of India is the largest source of domestic trafficking in India. It's just known, the traffickers just go, it takes just a few weeks for them to integrate into a tea growing community and, find one or two young girls to prey upon and make a lot of money off of that. I think it's 2 girls per, or no, now it's 3. 3 girls per estate per year are disappear on the tea estates in Assam, and there are like hundreds of Assams in hundreds of estates in Assam. So it's an epidemic, really. Yeah, and that's all part of it, Rabbit. So like that's gonna be our job. So Rabbit says we need to be down to change tea names like Ceylon and English breakfast, which do have their roots in colonial history. I mean, even Formosa has roots in colonial history. And yeah, that's the job that we can do, like even as consumers, just being aware of those histories and being aware that like our own energetic projections on those histories, even if we say, so like today at lunch, my friend accidentally called me and my other friend, 2 women, called us guys. I was like, oh, here, guys, here's your thing. And then she was quick to correct herself and say, oh, I had a couple of women in here earlier, and I called them guys, and those women got really offended. And she's like, come on, like, it's just a commonly used term. Like, we just use it. Everybody knows guys just means people. Like, and, you know, that could be another example. Not to say that, like, any feminists or anybody that identifies with being a feminist would then need to change their use of that word guys to a different term, but it wouldn't hurt. And it's kind of along the lines with this practice of us as individuals to adopt healthier vocabularies and just being in touch with trauma response. Like, not to say that, like, we're gonna say, oh, everybody should be sensitive to this. Like, anybody from Sri Lanka should always be sensitive and offended when they hear the word Ceylon. It's like, no, that's not what it's about. It's just about taking our own personal accountability of our allyship or our advocacy or our activism that we may want to be practicing. Oh, you did in your cafe? That's awesome. Great. Yeah, I did that too. I don't use any of those terms in our naming. But that's because the names of all of our teas, we let the farmers make the names. We let the farmers set everything on the tea. The story of how we tell it, the pricing even, like, we let the farmers set all of that, and it works out. It ends up being a lot better. None of the farmers in Sri Lanka we work with ever call their tea Ceylon. Tea traders will, and tea wholesalers and brokers, they'll call it Ceylon, just because that's like the fancy marketed name. I don't even call our Darjeeling tea Darjeeling anymore. I call it Gorkha tea. Educating without shaming. That is huge. That is so big. So big. Hi, tea artists. Hi, Jen and Tea. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks for coming in. It's Wednesday, which means I'm hosting our weekly Constitution study group. Hey, Bender, what's up? You know Gorkha? Bender, do you know Gorkha? Do you know what Gorkha means? Gorkha is an important word. Gorkha is a very important word. It's, Darjeeling's a whole other... Darjeeling is a whole other story. I could do whole streams just on Darjeeling. Darjeeling has an incredible colonial past, of course, but it also has an incredible story of resilience and fighting, because Gorkha in itself, like, culturally, Gorkha is Nepalese. It's like another word for Nepalese, but it's not all Nepalese. Not all Nepalese identify with being Gorkha. Gorkha is a specific, kind of group of family communities, but they're all from, like, the Darjeeling side, like the Indian side of Nepal. They are known for being fierce. They are known for being warriors. They are, like, the strongest, most famous warriors of all of human history. In fact, there's a famous quote from Adolf Hitler where he said, "I would have won the war if only I had 3 Gorkha soldiers on my side." The British actually have their own special unit of fierce warriors, the Gorkha battalion. And so anyway, you've heard about the protest, and you've heard about there was, like, a strike, a major strike that affected the 2017 second harvest of Darjeeling tea. And that was the local people sticking up and saying, hey, we're just not going to work. We're going to hold our entire industry hostage so that we can get our message across that we are autonomous, we are strong, we are independent, and we can run our own industry ourselves without needing the influence of non-Gorkhas, predominantly Bengali and Maori business. So that's like the business caste in India who had acquired ownership of the Darjeeling estate system after the British left in independence. So, like, interesting side story about that. When you talk to elders in the Darjeeling tea fields and you ask them about the colonial days, you ask them about British ownership days, they actually call that the golden days of Darjeeling. And it's like, golden days? Like, you didn't have independence. You had no autonomy. Like, you were under British rule. You were And during that time, it was an official slavery. It was like a real slave-master relationship. And it's, how could you consider that to be golden days compared to now, where, you have Indian ownership? It's no longer a slave. I mean, it's an indentured slavery system, but it's not a technical slave system. And they're like, yeah, because the British, even though they were owning us and they were owning this system, they were building with a different mentality, which was a mentality of legacy, a mentality of, if we treat our environment and our workers better, treat them like humans, treat them in some kind of upward mobility fashion, even though they're still slaves, they're still owned, that they would produce a better quality product and that legacy goal would be better achieved. And so, yeah, organic agriculture was prevalent. I mean, that's an older time when organic was all we did, but pay was higher. The services and the resources that were available for the workers and their families was more. And then as soon as India received its independence, it was illegal for a British company to own anything in India. So they had to sell their assets. They had to sell their businesses. Of course, these British companies aren't just going to say, okay, yeah, we're out of here. Like, they're going to sell stuff before they leave. And so they sold those slave production systems to Indian companies that could afford it. Well, that wasn't the local Gorkha people that were working there. That was actually business people from Calcutta. And that's the reason why Calcutta, which is like actually quite far from Darjeeling, pretty far, there's the state of West Bengal, is like this super long, skinny state in the middle of India. And it's like, why is it a state like that? Like, Calcutta, the capital, is down here, and Darjeeling's all the way up there. Like, why is it like that? Is because of the industry, the tea industry. That the business owners wanted to have their position of power. So the strike and all of that is actually the workers and the local people, which 99% of the population of Darjeeling is Nepali. They speak Nepali, they identify culturally as Nepali, and they are petitioning and striking for an independent state to be formed, separate of West Bengal, called Gorkha land. So there's that word Gorkha again, Gorkha land. And it's pretty incredible. But in the tea business, if you ever meet like a Darjeeling specialist, or you ever meet like, there's a very popular tea trader in the United States, well, actually all over the world. He does work all over. And I know him dearly. He was one of my first tea mentors, but unfortunately, I don't consider him a mentor anymore. But it's just so heartbreaking, because when I had met him and he kind of acquired that position of mentorship for me, he like would call himself Darjeeling. I am Darjeeling. I'm Mr. Darjeeling. And so naive, uneducated me, inexperienced me, I just assumed, okay, he's like Darjeeling. And the first year I went, I could see right through everything. I could see, yeah, you're not Darjeeling. Like, you look different. You speak differently. And yeah, I think they're Bengali. Yeah. And then I realized that 99% of the population of Darjeeling is all Nepali. They speak Nepali. And actually the thing that triggered that strike that happened was that the West Bengali government made a law that would make it illegal for schools or any government buildings or organizations to use any language other than English and Bengali. So it was like the language that they could speak. So like Nepali people speak Nepalese at home. And when they go to school, they will start to learn English. You know, that's the official language of India. So they'll start to learn English in school. But you're not going to learn that language, you know, unless it's taught to you in your mother tongue. And so that's usually how it works. It's always how it works. And all of a sudden, this government's trying to say, you can't be your political identity, or not your political identity, but you can't be your cultural identity anymore. It's going to be illegal for you. And that's been actually one of the most horrific things that's happened in colonization around the world. It's a story told over and over again where people's cultural identity was stripped from them because some other culture thought, their culture is priority and more civilized than the other. So that's what got the Gorkhas all fired up. They were like, hey, you can't take our cultural identity away from us. I just love that. I love the Gorkha culture. Hello from the Netherlands. Thank you for joining today. How are you doing today? Hold on, I gotta check out your screen name. For some reason I can't. Your screen name is like super blue. Oh, Arcane Scorch. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming by. I'm talking about consensus today. I kind of just went on a little a tangent about Darjeeling tea and colonial names and tea. But no tangent is bad. They're all okay. It's okay. We're here to hold space for everybody and everything. Oh, you have to go to the dentist tomorrow. Oh, I'm so bad. Well, I guess there's a consensus that we can all agree on, is that going to the dentist is it's a very anxiety-ridden task. I hope you don't have to get too much work done. I hope you get good news from the dentists, and yeah. But that's very responsible of you to go to the dentist. I know some people that don't go in years, so it's very responsible. All right, I'm gonna get going on my third steep, and then I'm gonna visit that article about public consensus as constitutional authority. I'll look into that. 2 molars have to go, so they're just gonna yank them out. They're gonna take them out. You know what? That's always a good thing. Just molars are pretty important, though. Are you planning to get some implants or something to fill that void? Yeah, molars are really important. Like wisdom teeth, that's something like when those get pulled, they're not as important. So I don't know of anybody that's ever gotten like wisdom teeth implants, but the molars, you would definitely need implants. I have terrible molars. I was born with a birth defect, which no doctor has ever understood or ever been able to explain to me. But I was born with a birth defect where my adult molars, not my baby molars, but my adult molars came out with no enamel on them. I haven't had to have them pulled, but I have caps. All 4 of them have caps, which I probably should get replaced because, you know how it is. Hey, Trenty, what's up? What's up? Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for stopping by. We're talking about consensus today. And for you, Ascended Scorch. Scorch, can I just call you Scorch? I'm just going to call you Scorch. Scorch, let me know, what is your opinion on consensus? Do you think consensus is possible? And it doesn't matter what definition of consensus you're using. You are welcome to provide your feedback. So hey, we may help discover our medical mysteries together. So there in the Netherlands, you have something called wolf. Peter and the wolf. That's a famous story, and that's when your molars come out with no enamel on them. Yeah, I'm grateful for those caps I have, because without that, like when I was a kid and my adult molars started coming out, and we didn't know about the whole enamel thing. Like I hadn't gone to the dentist to ask them what's going on, but as my molars came out, I was call you Peter. Okay, Peter, I got it. I got it. Thanks, Peter. Cool. My last name is Peterson, so I will remember your name, Peter. Yeah, like when my molars started coming out, anything like cold, hot, or sound, like metal on metal sound, oh my goodness, it was so painful. So painful. Like, and then go to the dentist, and I'm trying to tell the dentist about my pain, and it's like even my mouth being open with like the cool air going against the teeth was very challenging. So the caps, they help a lot. Your line buildup, what is that? What's your line buildup? So guys, if you're just joining, I am brewing some tea, brewing some 2019 Sheng Pu'er. This is raw pu'er from Old Trees, Gushu Cha from Nanoshan, Yunnan. Oh, I see. They spray. What is the spray? Just some kind of layer, you don't know what it is. But it helps like coat, like if you have any like nerves exposed. Because like I heard that like when I was so sensitive and I'd ask the dentist, well, why am I so sensitive? It's like my nerves. It's like my nerves are directly sensing anything. And he was like, yeah, when you don't have the enamel, your tooth under that is just nerves. It's just all, you know, nerve endings that you can sense and feel everything. So maybe that layer you're talking about, that spray layer, helps coat everything. My blue teacup. Nice tea. Cheers. Thanks for joining me, guys. Cheers to you, Peter. Thanks for being here. I think this is the first time you've come by. It's definitely the first time you've said hello. So thank you for saying hello. And if this is your first time here, my name is Elise, and this is my tea table. I'm based in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I run a software company that is a B2B marketplace, wholesale marketplace for independent tea farmers to distribute their tea to wholesale tea business buyers. So I'm a little bit of a tea expert, but I'm into lots of other things, specifically around a good life, you know, a good healthy lifestyle, civility, and that's why on Wednesday afternoons I host this Constitution study group where we look at the United States Constitution, trying to learn. This is a non-political civic engagement platform. So yeah, feel free to be here. Always happy to hear perspectives and discussion from people outside the United States too. Do I have the big Asian flower tea? I believe that you're talking about the blooming tea, the Chinese blooming tea, where they will take tea leaves and fill the inside of the tea leaves with some flowers and then seal it all together. So whenever you put the ball, it's like a ball of tea, when you put it into the pitcher with the hot water over time, the ball will open up and flowers will bloom from inside. Yeah, I don't deal in that type of product. I exclusively work with small family farms doing artisanal handmade teas. And those teas, they're kind of like a hype thing, you know. They're made in factories, they're a commercial process. Like small family farms don't make those types of tea. Although there is one farm that we work with in Sri Lanka. They make something similar to that. They are handmade, but they're about 10 times more expensive than the ones that you can buy on Amazon. So they don't really compete very well. But if you've ever tried one of those, they're beautiful. They're definitely a crowd pleaser. Beautiful aesthetic, very cool to see everything opening up and blooming. But then when you taste the actual product, it's not so good. Pickwick, is that a brand? That's a brand I never heard of. I'm gonna look it up right now. I'd like to know what that is. I see. Yep, this is a brand. Oh, it's also the leading tea brand in Denmark. Cool. We've got a good friend from Denmark. Hangs out with us in Twitch. Yeah, I wonder if those brands carry that blooming tea. It seems that they just do tea bags, which we don't do tea bags here. There's several reasons why. I won't go into detail, but yeah, we don't do tea bags around here. It's a nasty trend. We just do the loose leaf tea like this. See how beautiful that is? Very nice, very, very nice. The experience is way different than a tea bag. Like the flavor, and then this tea, I'll be able, like, I'll be streaming for a couple of hours with you guys, and I'll be able to just use this tea. I can re-infuse it over and over again. I could just keep adding more of the hot water to re-infuse it. Definitely. So people will always say like, oh, it's more expensive, you know, because you can buy a box of tea bags at the grocery store for, let's say, example, $5. And then, you know, they'll come onto my website and say, oh dear, this costs $30. Like, it's so much more expensive. And if you actually count out the amount of cups that you would get from this leaf versus that box of tea bags, you may find, or you will find, that the price per cup on this style of tea is actually lower than with the tea bags. And then tea bags have microplastics, like a lot. And there's like several scientific studies that prove that. So if you're not into consuming plastic, probably should stay away from the tea bags. Yeah, the Asian market should have tea leaves, but I know in the Netherlands, there's actually quite a few really great tea houses there that are selling very good quality loose leaf tea similar to this. Are you in the city? Or are you in the countryside? I've never been to the Netherlands, so I'm not too sure. It's a small place. It's not a very large place, but like I'm assuming that there's like an urban versus a rural part of the country, right? Awesome, you're in the countryside. And there's an Asian market in the countryside. That's great. I love Asian markets. You get lots of goodies there. Lots and lots of goodies. Oh, you're near the German border. Well, there's a lot of great tea in Germany. Actually, it's so interesting. Like 70% of the world's tea goes through Germany. So Germany is a major tea business hub. I mean, most of that tea is going into tea bags and going into like this Pickwick style tea that you shared with me. Like this style of tea, like Chinese tea leaves, they don't really go through Germany because this is not like the commodity centralized, you know, supply chain. Tea like this comes directly from the farmer. But yeah, Germany manages a lot of tea business around the world. Something to do with like the customs duties and the I don't know. And then also the processing of tea, so like the decaffeination of tea, all of that happens in Germany. Big processing facilities where they can do that. That sounds cool. Frisian? I'm gonna look that up. Friesland. Frisian? so cool. It is regarded as the closest language to English that's still spoken. West Frisian is spoken in the Dutch province of Friesland. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing this right. North Frisian is still spoken in part of Germany, or some of the islands and mainland of the North Sea coast below Denmark. So interesting. It's from the Viking era. Everybody loves Vikings. Everybody loves that culture. That's so cool. And the Viking age is from 800 to 1050. I'm actually Danish. So Peter, I told you my name is Petersen. S-E-N. My grandpa immigrated to, well, first he immigrated to Canada and then met my grandma, who was Irish, and then they moved down to the United States after they met in Canada. Hey Nick, what's up? I'll say what's up. You probably left already. Yep, that's me. My round face. They always say like the round face gives it away. Our two most northern provinces had a Viking ruler named Redbad. What a cool name. I'm gonna look Redbad up. You guys are enjoying the music. This is just like an improvised jam. Today I'm talking about consensus, and I figured there's no better place in music where consensus is required than jam bands and jam music. Oh, there was actually a movie. There was actually a movie about Redbad. It's a Dutch movie. Oh, I should totally watch this. I wonder if it's on Netflix. I love Viking, like the Viking show, and then there was another one on Netflix. Oh, the trailer was never shown because it was considered offensive. Viking Uprising. I'll see if it's on Netflix. And if it is, that might be my movie to watch tonight. A bad one of slavery? Well, that's important.
That was the thing about best friend.
No, it's not on Netflix. I'll have to try to find it somewhere else. I'll have to find it somewhere else. Yep. Yeah, and the East India Company. Yeah, speaking of tea, you know, like that was a big part of the business of the East India Trade Company was tea, and of course labor. And so, it's cool. It's cool, Peter, that you are addressing this, and it seems as if you have some interest in learning from it and evolving from it, and not so much shaming that history or trying to ignore that history, but just being aware of it so that we can make mindful, better decisions into the future. And so, I'm talking about like the importance of drinking good tea like this, and yeah, you're not hiding. I'm not saying that you're hiding, and I think that's very good. Like, that's the first step of evolving and creating good cultural change that we'd like to see in the world, is not to hide our past or shame our past, but oh, thank you. Yes, that's exact. We can't be afraid to discuss it. Like, we need to discuss it. And so the reason why I'm bringing this in is, and oh, speaking of Denmark and Vikings, hello, Tef. Tef, were you here? Did you hear me talking about you earlier? I figured you might be lurking. You might be lurking there somewhere. Well, that's a different issue, but we can talk about the traumas of the past that you ever. Yes, they're both an issue, actually. They're both problem issue. They're both, yeah. But in different ways, in very different ways. But in addressing past traumas like you just did, it's very important. And I will like to hold you accountable for your own decisions. So, like the tea bags, what you did, those brands that you showed me, and all of that tea business and in Germany that I was talking about, it's not coming from direct slave trade systems, but it's coming from something similar to that, where there is oppressed, indentured communities that are the backbone of those businesses, and then there are side dark things that are not directly the actions of the business or the industry, but they, kind of are the foundation of it. So, our current issues around human trafficking, which, is slave trafficking. We don't talk about it. It's not like an open market system. It's a black market system. And the source of where they acquire the people who almost consensually agree. They consensually agree to go be a part of this system because they're so oppressed in their own lifestyle as like a tea farm worker, that the idea of moving into the city and, working in the city seems so much more attractive, even if you're going with this shady guy. You're in such an oppressed position that you choose to go. And then, that ends up being, into like a slave type system. So, that tea bag, that brand that you recommended, even though it's not, openly and directly involved in some type of slave trade type of system like the East India Tea Company was, or trade company was, it's still there. And if we're going to talk about it, talk about that dark past and just acknowledge it and be aware of it, we can still make decisions in our now and our today that are related to very similar topics. So if you want to make good decisions, my only recommendation, there's not a coverall. There's not like even the fair trade. Fair trade is not even good enough to follow. We've learned to trust these seals like fair trade or organic, but even those are corrupted. Like, you really have to dig deeper. And so, great, Peter, you stored my website. My website will not teach you everything, but it will give you a look into a window of what is possible, which is information. Like, the products that you consume, be it chocolate, be it coffee, be it tea, be it spices, those types of products, instead of just trusting this certification or label that's going to tell you, oh, this is good or ethical, or this doesn't have slave trade behind it, or it doesn't have oppression behind it. And clothing too. I mean, all of our consumable products, everything. You know, and there's not really, we can't trust the government. We can't trust, you know, fair trade to regulate this stuff for us. But with the internet and with information, you know, at the fingers of our at the tips of our fingertips now, we can make much more informed decisions. So, cheers, Peter. I appreciate you bringing this to our Constitution study group today. I really do. Tef, thank you for the lurk. I do appreciate that. Yeah, our friend Peter, who is from the Netherlands here, I'm chatting with. He had, oh, I'm sorry, well, Peter, I guess that's a male's name. I'm always careful about misgendering people because, you know, we don't know each other, we can't see each other's faces or really know each other. But anyway, Peter had mentioned a brand that's very popular in the Netherlands, and I looked it up and it said that it's also the dominant brand in Denmark too. And so I thought about you. Yeah, you're a man, I'm a woman. Good to know. The more you know, they say. I get misgendered on Twitch all the time, especially in chat. You know, if I'm hanging out in someone's chat, like, without a doubt, the streamer always misgenders me. Like, hey dude, thanks bro. Because they just assume. They assume that if you're on Twitch, they assume, you know, if you're hanging out and able to hold up with the trolls, you must be another bro. Which, you know, I'm not necessarily a bro. Not there. Okay, I'm gonna get back to our work. Which brand? The brand was Tickwick, something Wick, Fickwick, Mickwick, Pickwick. You should know that, Tef. I'm not endorsing the brand by any means. I just finished explaining that brand is probably closer related to the politics and ethics of the East India Trade Company than, you know, something ethical that we would probably want to be supporting. Yes, Pickwick. Yeah. Duh, Tef. That's what we just said. All right, consensus. We're talking about consensus. And the definition that I want to focus on is group solidarity in sentiment and belief. All right, so in this University of Michigan Law School article, you know, I did want to look at this this insert here about how to think about sources of constitutional authority, because this article is titled Public Consensus as Constitutional Authority. So constitutional authority is like the Constitution. It's like what authorities and what protocols does the Constitution set? And then those are going to be the parameters that we'll use in making judiciary decisions or administrative decisions or legislative decisions that are all meant to kind of protect consensus, protect democracy. All right, Tef, I think you're getting called out. I don't know what that is. Du eres dansk? Du eres dansk? Is that how you say that? I'm guessing that's Danish. But Tef, you should help me with Danish, so that way I can put like a command on my channel to speak Danish. I don't know how to say anything in Danish. Actually, maybe. No, that's German. That's not Danish. I was taught, my grandpa taught me how to count in Danish. But I think it might be German, actually. It's not Danish. I'm sorry. But I'm sure they're similar. The dialects are similar. But I'll ask you sometime, Steph. Maybe you can help me. Urdu dansker. Urdu dansker. Is that how you say it? Du er dansk? Urdu. Urdu dansker? Or snakker du dansk? Snakker? I like that word. That's a good word. Snakker du dansk? Oh, I'm learning a little bit. Thanks, Tef. Thanks, guys. Very international crowd. Always learning something new. All right, I'll let you guys do your German lessons there, and I'll get reading this article. According to an important conventional view, constitutional law exists precisely to block the force of public opinion. That proposition might imply that constitutional authority and public opinion have a zero-sum relationship. So a zero-sum relationship, that's just a term from game theory, economic game theory, where there's a relationship between two or more where one's gain is someone else's loss in any situation. It would then be incoherent to suggest that public consensus, which is the limiting case of public opinion, could itself be a source of constitutional authority. Although this conventional view makes a considerable amount of sense, it is not quite the whole story. To begin to see why not, we should ask what justifies the authority of those sources that are regarded as authoritative in constitutional law, such as constitutional texts and judicial precedent. On the best account of the authority of those sources, public opinion cannot be completely excluded from the set of potential authorities. As I have argued elsewhere, the best justification for regarding any potential source of authority as authoritative in a constitutional case is that doing so conduces to decision-making that respects the basic values of the constitutional system. Why, for example, should the text of the Constitution be a source of authority? The answer is that in appropriate circumstances, treating the text as authoritative can vindicate the democratic process, uphold the rule of law, or in a society that understands itself as governed by a written constitution, promote the public's identification with the governing regime. Democracy, the rule of law, and subjective public identification with the regime are all important constitutional values in the American system. All right, I'm going to catch up with your... Oh, you guys are chatting. I love this. Speaking different. And if you can control Dutch, you can also talk South African 80%. Colonized South Africa, not indigenous South African. And I'm sure there's a bunch of, probably the majority of the population of South Africa that is still upholding and practicing its indigenous cultures, its native cultures, i.e. not speaking English or not speaking Afrikaan. That's like the like new language of South Africa. It's like, yeah, because they never went to school. Yeah. Afrikaans, yep. But that's only in like the cities or in the, yeah, I mean, it's really only in the city. Because even if you go out to the bush, as it's called, there will be like larger villages that do have schools and do learn the official languages, be it English or French or whatever colonized language that took over that country. They'll learn it, but then even still on their day-to-day in their households, they'll still speak their native language. Yeah. Yep. All those things that you're talking about, Peter, are all manifestations of colonization. And earlier I had a guest on my Instagram Live who's in the tea business that was talking about even names of teas that are rooted in this kind of colonization. Well, the colonizers still have New York. So, that's how it works. To be sure, this is an untidy way of thinking about constitutional authorities. It requires reference to the substance of the constitutional system's values, and those values are fiercely contested. Indeed, they are contested on two levels. First, people disagree about what should be on the list of constitutional values. Second, even when people agree that something is a constitutional value, they may disagree as to its content. We all agree that democracy is a constitutional value, but we have different views about what democracy requires. Such disagreements can make it hard to decide whether a particular decision-making technique actually promotes an important constitutional value. One perennial issue in the wars over originalism, for example, is whether deciding cases by reference to original meanings serves or disserves democracy. And part of that disagreement reflects on deeper disagreement about the best understanding of democracy. That said, there are areas of broad agreement as well as of disagreement. Virtually all participants in the American constitutional system would agree that awarding offices on the basis of elections respects democracy, but that awarding offices on the candidates who can swim the fastest does not. And the standard method of arguing for a particular method of constitutional interpretation is to show that the method, properly applied, is justified in terms of an underlying constitutional value like democracy or the rule of law. All right, so this was just public consensus. Here we go. There's a little chart just on public consensus. So that I just read was about constitutional authority. Now, public consensus, let's see this. If the reason to treat something as a source of authority in constitutional decision-making is that doing so conduces to decisions that respect or vindicate constitutional values, and if the set of relevant, if contestant values includes democracy, the rule of law, and public identification with the regime, then the door is open to considering public consensus as a source of constitutional authority. It is easy to show that in at least some circumstances, attention to public consensus in constitutional decision-making would show respect for democracy, promote the rule of law, and enhance public identification with the regime. First, treating the public's view as a source of authority straightforwardly shows respect for democracy, if not for formal democratic decision-making. Second, and where the will of the people is ocratic, is full of testimony, avoiding the crisis that might rise if the public felt that the court was construing the Constitution intolerably, can help preserve public respect for governmental institutions, including courts, and therefore for the rule of law. To the considerable extent that attention to public consensus acts as a brake of judicially ordered social change, treating popular consensus as a source of constitutional authority may also enhance the rule of law by promoting the stability of legal norms. The last situation is complicated because it might pit some kind of rule of law value against others, as I will explain below. Third, and perhaps most obviously, the substantive alignment of constitutional doctrine with the public's strongly held views helps maintain the public's identification with the constitutional regime. For all those reasons, public consensus has a claim to be a factor in the shaping of authentic constitutional meaning. That feels so good to say. Authentic constitutional meaning. So Peter, you asked constitution laws first, then state laws, right? Are you saying like federal law, like national level laws come first and then state laws come after in the United States? Is that what you're asking? Because I'll answer your question regardless, but I just want to, I want to make sure that I am understanding your question correctly. Let me know. I will answer that. That is definitely something that we've gone over in our study group. Okay, so yes, the Constitution states, like the constitutional law, like the United States Constitution, which is the longest living democratic constitution in the world, is that what's stated in that constitution is the protocol in which the entire country is going to work under. But if you read the Constitution, it's actually quite a short document. It's not a very large document, because the protocols that it lists out are very specific about the three main branches, right? And then the Bill of Rights, the amendments that go after that. But the Constitution does say that the overall protocols that are stated there, everybody must respect, but each state has its own priority in like setting their own laws. So if a state wants to set a law that goes above and beyond what the federal law says, then that law will supersede the federal law. But the federal law is like the basic requirement. And so when state law will become priority will be, you know, when it's more detailed. And like I said, the federal constitution, like the national level, the republic's constitution, is quite short. It doesn't have like great detail to it. And that's because there was a big argument. Like that was the whole thing, was that there was an argument at that time when the United States was being formed. There was an argument among the two main camps, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And the Federalists believed in having a strong central federal government where like they would make all the decisions and hold all the power. And the Anti-Federalists believed that the power should have been better distributed between all the different states. And so what ended up in the Constitution kind of ended up being like what was voted upon. You know, I think most of it favored more of the Federalists viewpoint. But, you know, there's definitely places where you can see compromise was made and, you know, the states were given more power. You're asking about the First Amendment. You're talking about specifically about the right to free speech. Yeah, that right, no matter where you are in whatever states, that right is there. Now the Second Amendment, that's a different one, because different states have different laws about how they execute the Second Amendment, which is involving the right to bear arms for the purpose of militia. That's what's interesting about the Second Amendment. And I've done like an entire series within. Hey, Douglas Taylor. Hey, Chef. How you doing? But yeah, each state can set its own. And then even within the state, each county and then each city can kind of set their own rules. So if they want to have rules that go above and beyond what the higher level of government has, they can do that. Yeah, so the way that guns are treated in each state, in each county, in each city is very different. But ultimately, the national level government does have that written as one of our rights to bear arms for the purpose of militia, which then really confusing because it's like, what is militia then? Okay, so let's read this next one. I'll just read this, and then I want to move on to this book. I'm not gonna read this whole book. I cannot read this whole book to you, don't worry. But I want to introduce this book because I believe that this is going, like, from here on out, at least for the next few weeks, this will be a main source of information for us to look at. To be sure, paying attention to public opinion could undermine constitutional values as well as respect them. Constitutional decision-making driven by popular whim could eviscerate the rule of law. That threat is less dangerous if public opinion must approach consensus to become an input in constitutional decision-making than if any majority preference could qualify. But this proviso could not eliminate the concern. Even large supermajorities can go terribly wrong. But in reality, that treating public consensus as a source of constitutional authority would sometimes disserve constitutional values fall well short of proving that public consensus cannot be constitutionally authoritative because the same is true of every source of constitutional authority. The president sometimes directs non-democratic decisions, as judges who must apply the court's school prayer decisions in culturally conservative jurisdictions are keenly aware. Text sometimes directs decisions that are both non-democratic and destabilizing, as it did when the court struck down the congressionally sanctioned practice of legislative veto. Clearly, though, precedent and text are valid sources of constitutional authority. They are not sources of authority that decision makers follow blindly in every case, nor should they be, because following them blindly would often disserve the values of the constitutional system. The responsibility of a good constitutional decision maker is to know when giving force to each potential source of authority will best respect the whole set of constitutional values. On that understanding, public consensus can be a source of authority on the same terms as text and precedent. All right, good question, Peter. Thank you for that incredible question. So Peter asked, wait, you just had a new election and a new government. Is it the new government able to change the Constitution also, or is that a permanent thing? No, the government cannot just change the Constitution how they feel. There's a process, and that's written in the Constitution about that process, and that's through the amendments. So that amendment that you referenced, the first and second that you referenced, those were, of course, the first and second ones that we had, but we are up to 23 amendments, and the last amendment was passed in the 1970s. So yeah, we are long overdue for another amendment to address certain things where we can change. And the new administration can certainly influence how a change can be made, but the change has to be, the protocol is that there has to be a vote. And that vote, just like the impeachment. So like you saw what happened with the impeachments. I'm sure that was famous all over the world. I'm sure you saw that on even your local news. The two impeachments that happened. So first there was a vote in the House. So the House has to vote on that first amendment, on the amendment that they want to change the Constitution. After they pass the vote, a majority vote on, or at least a 2/3 vote, then it goes to the Senate. So we have two houses of representatives, or two bodies of representatives. So, you know, you have the Congress or the House, and then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate has to vote on it, have a majority vote, and then, just like with any other law, the president would then have the power to authorize it or to veto it. So, you know, it has to go through everything. And so it could be votes within the individual organizations, or, and this has never happened in the past, but we can host a conventional or constitutional convention. And the original Constitution was written and voted on and signed through a convention. The very first time when they just drafted the thing together and voted on it, that was at a convention. We have not had another constitutional convention since that time. All of our amendments that have gone through have all gone through that first option where each individual organization does their own votes. And so what you're talking about here, can a new government change? And when I said that, like, they can influence that, like a new administration could influence it, they could instigate like a conference to happen. And actually Biden in his first day, when he first got into office, he came up with several executive orders. So that's something that the president can do, is they can make an executive order of like setting an intention about how something needs to operate. And one of them was about, okay, I want to make sure I phrase it correctly. So I'm going to make sure that I phrase it correctly. It was one of his first executive order. All right, so there was this one here. I'll pull it up so you can see it behind me. So this executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. So the administration has set the intention and like written out all of these parameters about how to execute this this order, and it's a data-driven analysis of, first, where is discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, where is it happening, and how can it be prevented. And in this data that comes up, this may instigate the legislative to come up with new laws or amendments, edits to the Constitution to address this issue. You know what I mean? And so like this is a way that the president, the new government that came into power, the new administration, this is a way where they could influence a potential rule change or change in the Constitution. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, it's pretty cool how all this stuff works. And before I started doing this study group every week, myself as well as several of my friends, we all identified like we thought this stuff was all pretty inaccessible to us to like stay on top of and to understand and to research. And doing this study group has really opened up my eyes that this stuff is all very accessible to us to be engaged with. So I'll close out reading this section here before I move on. 2 important questions may now be on readers' minds. First, does the public really have views on constitutional questions? Second, why would we think that judges are any good at discerning public opinion? These are important questions for Friedman as well, for me, of course. For his part, Friedman must be relatively sanguine about the answers, central to the will of the people as a people with a will and a set of justices who know, or at least guess, what the content of that will is. My approach permits me to be more skeptical. On the question of whether the public has views on constitutional questions, which for my purposes is best understood to ask whether the public has views approaching consensus, my answer is rarely but sometimes. To the question of whether judges are good at assessing public opinion, my answer is not especially. But neither of those answers indicate that public opinion cannot function as a source of constitutional authority. The fact that public consensus is rare means that the authority of public consensus is rarely an operative factor in constitutional law, but it does not preclude the possibility of such authority where the public does hold a consensus view. And if public opinion much must approach consensus before becoming authoritative, then even people lacking special skills in assessing public opinion might be able to give it force, intentionally or otherwise. To be sure, judges might still err on this score, but for such error would not differentiate public consensus from other sources of authority that judges deploy all the time. Judges are notoriously bad at interpreting 18th century history, but few people think that limitation of judicial competence means that 18th century historical sources are categorically excluded from the universe of constitutional authorities. All right, so this goes on, and I, for my own interest, I'll go back and read this article for myself, but this is the book. This is the book that I wanted to look at, and I have now the Wikipedia open for this book, so we can learn a little bit more about this book and the author, and what we are, ultimately going to learn from it. So the book, Political Liberalism, is from 1993, written by John Rawls. In it, he attempts to show that his theory of justice is not a comprehensive concept of the good, but is instead compatible with the liberal conception of the role of justice, namely that government should be neutral between competing conceptions of the good. Rawls tries to show that his two principles of justice, properly understood, form a theory of the right, as opposed to the theory of the good, which would be supported by all reasonable individuals, even under conditions of reasonable pluralism. The mechanism by which he demonstrates this so-called overlapping consensus. Here he also develops his idea of public reason. So yeah, the book is a series of lectures on each of these individual topics that this Wikipedia article just mentioned. So reasonable pluralism, let's just look first, let's just find out. Pluralism is a political philosophy, is recognized in recognition and affirmation of diversity within a political body, which is seen to permit the peaceful coexistence of different interests, convictions, and lifestyles. So that's pluralism. So, if you just look at this world of pluralism, that means, diversity and interest and convictions and lifestyles. If we were to solely look at that word, then that word would mean that an ultimate consensus is not possible. Again, consensus, and the definition of consensus that I want to see here and focus this conversation on is group solidarity in sentiment and belief. So yeah, if you've got a pluralism, you don't have a consensus. But there's this word here, reasonable. Reasonable, that changes everything, as we'll see in the book. And then, so there's this concept of overlapping consensus. So we'll read that. It's a term coined in his book. It refers to how supporters of different comprehensive normative doctrines that entail apparently, let's look at this. That until apparently inconsistent conceptions of justice can agree on particular principles of justice that underwrite a political community's basic social institutions. Comprehensive doctrines can include systems of religion, political ideology, and morality. So comprehensive doctrines just means the diversity in those viewpoints, which can be based on our spiritualities, on our economic position, on our employment, or lifestyle, any of those things. He explains that an overlapping consensus on principles of justice can occur despite considerable differences in citizens' conceptions of justice, provided that these conceptions lead to similar political judgments. The groups are able to achieve this consensus in part by refraining from political public disputes over fundamental, e.g. metaphysical, arguments regarding religion and philosophy. So Peter, as you mentioned earlier, that religion, being a big issue of this pluralism and lack of agreement, in this idea of overlapping consensus, we would put all those things to the side and be able to understand a consensus, because we'd be focused not so much on those differences, but on the similar political judgments, mostly in regards to justice, which is a big component. Justice is the judicial branch of the Constitution, is a big component of democracy and of civility. Hi Brian Clark. Happy Wednesday. Happy Constitution Study Group. We don't have a referendum directly, but let's see. Oh, interesting. We do. Interesting. Hola. My phone's about to die, so as soon as it dies, I'm gonna go off. So if you miss me here, you can come hit me up on the Twitch or the Facebook. Yeah, but I think that's mostly to do with states. So the states allow referendums, but not the federal. And this is cool. Here, I'll show you this. This is also from Wikipedia. Gotta love Wikipedia. The little chart here of all the different states and the different systems that each state has. And so you can see referendum, all the states that have it. And so yeah, this is like when the citizen is able to have a direct say into, amendments or other laws that need to be passed. So yeah, statute or initiatives, that's usually voted on. But yeah, the referendum, you can see all the states that have them. So we'll see. I'm in Nevada. Let's see if Nevada has it. Yeah, Nevada has it. But there's a lot of states that don't. But I don't think the federal has referendums. Yeah, I'm sure they're used. I don't think they'd have them unless they weren't used. The thing that, like, as voters, the thing that we're most accustomed to is this statute or initiative. But yeah, I don't think we have it on the federal level. But we do have systems in place for... Oh, you guys have your elections in March? How is it? How's the vibe there? Is there angst? Is it severely polarized like our election was? You don't have to give details, and please don't even give your personal opinion on it. That's fine. That's not what this is about. I'm just trying to, to understand more about you and where you're from. Oh, they can't wait. Is there something, is the current administration... You have 14 parties to choose from. That is incredible. We've got 2. Even though we do technically have other parties, our current political system in the United States is it's a system. It's a whole system, and it's dominated by 2 parties. So you have a left, a right, a green, a middle. Yeah, we just have a left and a right, basically. And the system ingrained with both of them is like almost similar. But the media and the narrative that's given by both those sides has really influences the citizens' understanding of politics and how our elections work. Oh, so you guys also just end up with 2. Yeah. I mean, we technically can vote for something outside of those 2 parties, but you're oftentimes criticized for indirectly supporting one or the other by voting for a third party or, a different party, which is unfair. I don't think that's fair. We should vote for, like, really what we believe. Okay. So that's it. Political liberalism. It is not, it's, a framework just written here, but you can understand a lot about politics and consensus by reading his viewpoint. And so, with that, I'll move into that segment of our stream. All right, guys, I'm gonna go take just a wee little break, really fast. I'm gonna sign off of Instagram because my phone's about to die. But if you want to stay with the conversation and, see the introduction of this great book, Political Liberalism, go catch me on Twitch or Facebook. You can find us through TLetT, all our social handles. But I will be right back. I'm going to be right back. Peter, I hope you stick around. I will keep the music playing for you. So if you're by... That's a good one. That's a good one. I got that. I understand. That's my fault, Peter. I hope you enjoyed your cigarette. Thank you for your patience. Well, I took that short break. I'm back now. Thank you so much for your patience, for waiting. All right, so, yeah. Sorry, my break took a little bit longer than I thought. Oh man, I'm so sad that I'm not going to be able to see this Rise of the Viking on Netflix. I can watch it here. It says watch for free here. Oh wow, I found a free one. Cool, I'll just watch it here. It's a 3-hour movie. Wow, that's a commitment. It's almost 3 a.m. Yeah. Are you a night person? Are you usually staying up late at night? That's me. I'm commonly awake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I'll watch it and I'll let you know what I think. I love movies like that. Love like historical fiction, epic movies. I really like Hindi movies for that reason too. Alright, so here's the book. And, I just kind of wanted to read a little bit from the introduction, just to kind of explain, like, the basis of his theories. You're eating painkillers. Well, that should knock you out. You should be going to sleep soon. Usually painkillers put you right out. Actually, for me, with painkillers, they don't put me to sleep, but they make me want to sleep. Because I kind of don't like... I don't like the feeling. I don't like the grogginess and kind of the clouded feeling that I get when I'm on... I haven't been on painkillers for a long part of my life. I think only one time when I broke my nose and I was prescribed some. And I took it twice. Because after the second time, I was like, no, this is not a feeling I like. And so I would sleep to not feel that grogginess. Didn't like it. It wasn't for me. But I hope you feel better. If you are dealing with some pain, I hope you feel better. And could recommend drinking good tea. Good tea can help with pain, but there's something else that we work with in the United States, which in Europe is starting to take off as well, which is hemp, industrial hemp. This is the flower here from the hemp flower. Kind of looks like cannabis. Let's see. My hotkeys. Every now and then my hotkeys just stop working. Smells like cannabis. But if you can get a hold of the high CBD value hemp, which this cultivar hemp is high in CBD, then you should be able to, you can just steep this like tea and get the effects, get some anti-anxiety, anti-pain, your body just feels relaxed. And it's subtle, it's not... But if you're dealing with some major pain, I know the the pharmaceutical industry is getting involved in the hemp business with CBD to extract CBD and tinctures or in oils, which it gives you a more medicinal dosage of the CBD to help with pain relief. But even if you take it from the flower like this and just steep it like tea, you're not getting a bunch of the CBD from it. And when it's hemp, instead of the cannabis, so the cannabis has the THC. I wouldn't say the THC ruins your brain, but for a short period of time, it physiologically affects your brain's performance. In addition to relaxing you and helping with pain relief, because a lot of people do self-medicate themselves with cannabis to help with pain relief. But the hemp like this, Has no effect on the brain, no psychological effect on the brain. Smells good. Yeah. Yeah, you're in the Netherlands. It's been legal there, famously legal. And Love Tour, where are you? Where are you based? Oh, you can grow two plants per household. Cool. Okay, so Love Tour, you're talking about schizophrenia, which, you know, that among a whole list of mental health what's the word I'm trying to look for? But mental health ailments that may be assigned. That's not the word I was looking for. It's not issue either, because it's not an issue. It's like when you go and get a checkup and they give you your results. You know, so when it comes to any of those, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or, you know, any of the others, yeah, I won't say anything about even tea, you know, because tea itself, Camellia sinensis, has compounds in it that has effect on the brain, has an effect on how the brain behaves and performs. And I've always been very careful, even with talking about the brain health benefits of tea, to be mindful that there really is not a lot of research done on the effects with various mental health diagnosis. That was the word I was looking for, diagnosis. Yeah, who knows? That also hasn't been proven. It hasn't been proven one way or the other. Just like it hasn't been proven if diet affects triggers. Someone could say, when I eat pancakes, I get triggered. My schizophrenia gets triggered with pancakes. I don't know. Like, there's so many things that can trigger, and there's not a whole lot of internationally recognized science behind that. So I won't make a claim on one way or another. They need a trigger. Some people claim that cannabis protects them from those triggers. Like, I have friends that self-medicate for that very reason. So yeah, you're right, Peter. You're right. All right. Well, some people can say that LSD can trigger things, or it could help. Here in the United States, there have been several states that have been passing legislation for the research and pharmaceutical application of not LSD, but of psilocybin to help with PTSD, to help with trauma, which, you know, does end up manifesting itself into various mental illness conditions. Yeah. They used LSD in the 70s here in mental institutes. Yeah, I feel like with LSD, things can go in all types of ways. But with psilocybin, you know, even though it can be intense, you know, in the moment, I feel like the overall response in the body is quite organic, which I feel is like safer. Because with LSD, because it's like kind of man-made, it's kind of chemical in its nature, that can actually can be dangerous because you don't know. These things are all brand new. But psilocybin is a compound. And speaking of Vikings, didn't the Vikings enjoy psilocybin, like the mushrooms? So there's a long established history of that ethnobotany relationship between man and psychedelic mushrooms versus man and LSD. Oh, you don't know about that? Yeah, that might just be in like pop culture display of what a Viking is, but I'll look it up right now. There could be something about that. So there's several, the berserkers, Viking berserkers, they use psychedelic mushroom. Berserkers? I don't even know what that is. I'm gonna look that up right now. A berserker is an Old Norse written corpus. Berserkers were those who were said to have fought in trance-like fury, a characteristic which later gave rise to modern English word berserk, meaning fiercely violent or out of control. Huh, cool, learned something new. So supposedly the berserkers took mushrooms. Do you know the berserkers? They're kind of like the kamikazes, which the kamikazes, they were high on manufactured like methamphetamines. So they were all meth addicts, which made them, all the more crazy, ready to kamikaze for the cause. So yeah, the berserker Viking warriors were all tripping. They were all tripping. Oh man. All right, so I'm gonna read a little bit from here. Banzai and boom. Yep, that was the kamikazes. Like demolish the target any means possible, even if it means sacrificing your own life. Pretty sad. Are you taking off, Peter? Oh, hi, Anil. Thank you for joining. You are welcome. All right, Peter, thank you so much for the time you've spent with me today. I truly appreciate it, and I look forward to spending more time with you. So I hope you get some great rest and power up for tomorrow. No need to be sorry. We'll see you next time. Give me a follow, and next time I go live, you can be here. You can be here. I'd love to hold space for you again. Just to let you know, on Mondays, I do a segment called Dignified Hospitality. On Tuesdays, I do a late night art and tea stream. Wednesdays, of course, is Constitution Study Group. Thursdays, we do an interactive virtual tea house gathering, which you are more than welcome to come. So if you see me live tomorrow, you can join us. You can join the live fun with us. And then on Fridays, I do a segment called Best Life Fridays, where I spend the evening talking about ways that we can all find our path for the best life. Nice to meet you. Aw, thank you for the follow. Thank you, and I love you very much. All right, Anil, let's get studying. We're studying today. I am reading excerpts from this book called Political Liberalism, and talking about the topic of consensus. So, Anil, if you would like, please go ahead in the comments and provide your idea of, first, is consensus possible? Is it possible for an entire community of people to agree on a common set of ideals and values? And second of all, is consensus important for the government to protect our democracy? Okay, so I'm gonna start reading in this book. Yeah, I believed I wanted to start. Okay. The the aims of theory, still in paraphrase, so Theory is a book that he had published earlier, were to generalize and carry to a higher order of abstraction the traditional doctrine of the social contract. I wanted to show that this doctrine was not open to the more obvious objections often thought fatal to it. I hoped to work out more clearly the chief structural features of this conception, which I called justice as fairness, and to develop it as an alternative systemic account of justice that is superior to utilitarianism. The aims of these lectures are quite different. Note that in my summary of the aims of theory, the social contract tradition is seen as part of moral philosophy, and no distinction is drawn between moral and political philosophy. In theory, a moral doctrine of justice, general in scope, is not distinguished from strictly political conception of justice. Nothing is made of the contrast between comprehensive philosophical and moral doctrines and conceptions limited to the domain of the political. In the lectures in this volume, however, these distinctions and related ideas are fundamental. Indeed, it may seem that the aim and content of these lectures mark a major change. Certainly, as I have indicated, there are important differences, but to understand the nature and extent of the differences, one must see them as arising from trying to resolve a serious problem internal to justice as fairness, namely from the fact that the account of stability is part 3 of theory. This is your favorite subject. Oh, thank you, Anil. Why is this your favorite subject? Let me know. I would greatly love to know why this is your favorite subject. Now the serious problem is this. A modern democratic society is characterized not simply by a pluralism of comprehensive religious, philosophical, and moral doctrines, but by a pluralism of incompatible yet reasonable comprehensive doctrines. Not one of these doctrines is affirmed by citizens generally, nor should one expect that in the foreseeable future one of them or some of other reasonable doctrine will ever be affirmed by all or nearly all citizens. Political liberalism assumes that for political purposes, a plurality of reasonable yet incompetent comprehensive doctrines is the normal result of the exercise of human reason within the framework of the free institutions of a constitutional democratic regime. Political liberalism also supposes that a reasonable comprehensive doctrine does not reject the essentials of a democratic regime. Of course, a society may also contain unreasonable and irrational and even mad comprehensive doctrines. In their case, the problem is to contain them so that they do not undermine the unity and justice of society. The fact of a plurality of reasonable but incompatible comprehensive doctrines, the fact of reasonable pluralism, shows that, as used in theory, the idea of a well-ordered society of justice as fairness is unrealistic. This is because it is inconsistent with realizing its own principles under the best of foreseeable conditions. The account of the stability of a well-ordered society in Part 3 is therefore also unrealistic and must be recast. This problem sets the stage for the later essays beginning in 1980. The ambiguity of theory is now removed, and justice as fairness is presented from the outset as a political conception of justice. Surprisingly, this change in turn forces many other changes and calls for a family of ideas not needed before. I say surprisingly because the problem of stability has played very little role in the history of moral philosophy, so it may seem odd that an inconsistency of this kind should return out to force such extensive revisions. Yet the problem of stability is fundamental to political philosophy, and an inconsistency there is bound to require basic readjustments. So perhaps it is not surprising, after all, that besides the ideas already mentioned, the ideas of a political conception of justice as opposed to a comprehensive doctrine and an overlapping consensus of political reason, others are also needed. The main conclusion to draw from these remarks, a conclusion to which I return to in a moment, is that the problem of political liberalism is, how is it possible that there may exist over time a stable and just society of free and equal citizens profoundly divided by reasonable, though incompatible, religious, philosophical, and moral doctrines? Put another way, how is it possible that deeply opposed, though reasonable, comprehensive doctrines may live together and all affirm the political conception of a constitutional regime? What is the structure and content of a political conception that can gain the support of such an overlapping consensus? These are among the questions that political liberalism tries to answer. So, that I read from the introduction of this book, where he just gives an introduction of his philosophy and the lectures and the evolution of this philosophy of political liberalism from an earlier theory that he had published. So now I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts of it. So the next lecture, or the first lecture that I'll look at, this is lecture 4 in the book, and it's called The Idea of Overlapping Consensus. So I'm going to go ahead and thus, to see how a well-ordered society can be unified and stable, we introduce another basic idea of political liberalism to go with the idea of political conception of justice, namely the idea of an overlapping consensus of reasonable, comprehensive doctrines. In such a consensus, the reasonable doctrines endorse the political conception, each from its own point of view. Social unity is based on a consensus on the political conception, and stability is possible when the doctrines making up the consensus are affirmed by society's politically active citizens, and the requirements of justice are not too much in conflict with citizens' essential interests as formed and encouraged by their social arrangements. So that explains how consensus is made when you live in a pluralism society like we do, so many different diverse viewpoints. It's almost as if you have to put those viewpoints to the side so that a consensus can be drawn on the common interest between everybody, which in this book seems that justice, like the idea of conception of the good instead of the conception of the right. A theory of the right. Theory of the right versus theory of the good is how you get to this overlapping consensus. All right, so here's a question we can think about. How can the values of the special domain of the political, the values of a subdomain of the realm of all values, normally outweigh whatever values may conflict with them? Put another way, how can we affirm our comprehensive doctrine and yet hold that it would not be reasonable to use state power to gain everyone's allegiance to it? The answer to this question, the various aspects of which we shall discuss from now on, has two complementary parts. The first part says that the values of the political are very great values and hence not easily overridden. And these values govern the basic framework of social life, the very groundwork of our existence, and specify the fundamental terms of political and social cooperation. In Justice as Fairness, some of these great values, the values of justice, are expressed by the principles of justice for the basic structure. Among them, the values of equal political and civil liberty, fair equality of opportunity, the values of economic reciprocity, the social basis of mutual respect between citizens. Question of stability. All right, 3 features of overlapping consensus. Hopefully this gives us a better idea of what he's talking about. Before beginning, I recall 2 main points about the idea of an overlapping consensus. The first is that we look for a consensus of reasonable as opposed to unreasonable or irrational. So like anytime he's using the word reasonable, that's how it's defined. The crucial fact is not the fact of pluralism as such, but of reasonable pluralism. This diversity, political liberalism sees, as I have said, as the long-run result, the powers of human reason within an enduring background of free institutions. The fact of reasonable pluralism is not an unfortunate condition of human life, as we might see a pluralism as such, allowing for doctrines that are not only irrational, but mad and aggressive. And framing a political conception of justice so it can gain an overlapping consensus, we are not bending it to existing unreason, but to the fact of reasonable pluralism itself, the outcome of the free exercise of free human reason under conditions of liberty. I said that in constitutional democracy, the public concept of justice should be, so far as possible, presented as independent of comprehensive religious, philosophical, and moral doctrines. This means that justice as fairness is to be understood as the first stage of its exposition as a freestanding view that expresses a political condition of justice. It does not provide a specific religious, metaphysical, or the political conception is a module, an essential constituent part that in different ways fits itself and can be supported by various reasonable, comprehensive doctrines that endure in the society regulated by it. There are at least 4 objections likely to be raised among the idea of social unity founded in an overlapping consensus on a political conception of justice. I begin with perhaps the most obvious of these, namely that an overlapping consensus is a mere modus vivendi. Modus vivendi. Gotta look up a word. Let's see what this means. Modus vivendi. I think vivendi means big. Think Starbucks. It's a Latin phrase that means mode of living or way of life. It often is used to mean an arrangement or agreement that allows conflicting parties to coexist in peace. All right, new word. I like this. To fix ideas, I shall use a model case of an overlapping consensus to indicate what it meant, and I shall return to this example from time to time. It contains 3 views. 1 affirms the political conception because its religious doctrine and account of free faith led to a principle of toleration and underwrite the fundamental liberties of a constitutional regime, while the second view affirms the political conception on the basis of a comprehensive liberal moral doctrine such as those of Kant or Mill. The third, however, is not systemically unified. Besides the political values formulated by a free-standing political conception of justice, it includes a large family of non-political values. It is a pluralist view, let us say. Since each subpart of this family has its own account based on ideas drawn from within it, leaving all values to be balanced against one another, either in groups or singly, in particular kinds of cases. In this model case, the religious doctrine and the liberalisms of Kant and Mill are taken to be general and comprehensive. The third view is only partially comprehensive, but holds with political liberalism that under reasonable, favorable conditions that make democracy possible, political values normally outweigh whatever non-political values conflict with them. The previous views agree with the last in this respect, and so all views lead to roughly the same political judgments, and thus overlap on the political conception. An overlapping consensus is quite different from a modus vivendi. So that's the way of life, like tolerating so that you can live in peace. In that example, note two aspects. First, the object of consensus, the political conception of justice, is itself a moral conception. And second, it is affirmed on moral grounds, that is, it includes conceptions of society and of its citizens as persons, as well as principles of justice, and an account of the political virtues through which those principles are embodied in human character and expressed in public life. An overlapping consensus, therefore, is not merely a consensus on accepting certain authorities or on complying with certain institutional arrangements founded on a convergence of self or group interest. All those who affirm the political conception start from within their own comprehensive view and draw on the religious, philosophical, and moral grounds it provides. The fact that people affirm the same political conception on those grounds does not make their affirming it any less religious, philosophical, or moral, as the case may be, since the grounds sincerely held doctrine, the nature, to help determine the nature of their affirmation. The preceding two aspects of an overlapping consensus, moral object and moral grounds, connect with the third aspect, that of stability. So then he's got a section here saying a political conception need not be comprehensive. So the reasonable comprehensive doctrines hold space for, everybody to have different opinions and different value systems, but then to find, consensus on a political conception. And that conception does not need to be comprehensive, even though the rest of the consensus is comprehensive. So even if we grant that an overlapping consensus is not a modus vivendi, as I have defined it, some may say that a workable political conception must be general and comprehensive. Without such a doctrine on hand, there is no way to order the many conflicts of justice that arise in public life. The deeper the conceptual and philosophical basis of those conflicts, the objection continues. The more general and comprehensive the level of philosophical reflection must be if their roots are to be laid bare and an appropriate ordering found. It is useless, the objection concludes, to try to work out a political conception of justice expressly for the basic structure apart from any comprehensive doctrine. Thus, the political conception can be seen as a part of the comprehensive doctrine, but is not a consequence of that doctrine's non-political views. Nevertheless, its political values normally outweigh whatever other values oppose them, at least under the reasonably favorable conditions that make a constitutional democracy possible. The virtue of political cooperation that makes a constitutional regime possible are then very great virtues. I mean, for example, the virtues of tolerance and being ready to meet others halfway, and the virtue of reasonableness and the sense of fairness. When these virtues are widespread in society and sustain its political conception of justice, they constitute a very great public good, part of society's political capital. Thus, the values that conflict with the political conception of justice and its sustaining virtues may be normally outweighed because they come into conflict with the very conditions that make fair social cooperation possible on a footing of mutual respect. Love that. Oh, and there's even a section here that says steps to constitutional consensus. So there's even steps you can follow, which is great. And steps to overlapping consensus. The last difficulty I consider is that an overlapping consensus is utopian. That is, there is no sufficient political, social, or physiological force, psychological force either to bring about an overlapping consensus when one does not exist, or to render one stable should one exist. I can only touch on this question and merely outline one way in which it seems such a consensus might come about and its stability secured. The outline is in two stages. The first stage ends with a constitutional consensus. The second with an overlapping consensus. So the constitutional consensus, a constitution satisfying certain basic principles, establishes democratic electoral procedures for moderating political rivalry within society. This rivalry includes not only that between classes and interests, but also between those favoring certain liberal principles over others for whatever reasons. While there is an agreement on certain basic political rights and liberties, on the right to vote and the freedom of political speech and association and whatever else is required for the electoral and legislative procedures of democracy, there is disagreement among those holding liberal principles as to the more exact content and boundaries of these rights and liberties, as well as on what further rights and liberties are to be counted as basic, and so merit legal, if not constitutional, protection. The constitutional consensus is not deep, and it is also not wide. It is narrow in scope, not including the basic structure, but only the political procedures of democratic government. And that's exactly the Constitution. That's what the Constitution is. The Constitution is not inherently a political document or protocol because it's narrow, and it's something that we can easily agree upon as being the basic protocols of how the government should work. Suppose that at a certain time, because of various historical events and contingencies, certain liberal principles of justice are accepted as a mere modus vivendi and are incorporated into existing political institutions. This acceptance has come about, let us say, in much the same way as the acceptance of the principle of toleration came as a modus vivendi following the Reformation. At first reluctantly, but nevertheless as providing the only workable alternative to endless and destructive civil strife. Our question then is, how might it happen that over time the initial acquisitions is in a constitution satisfying these liberal principles of justice develops into constitutional consensus in which those principles themselves are affirmed? At this point, a certain looseness in our comprehensive views, as well as their not being fully comprehensive, may be particularly significant. The second requirement of a stable constitutional consensus is connected with the kind of public reason that applying liberal principles of justice involves. Given the content of these principles, their reference solely to institutional facts of political procedures and their basic rights and liberties, and to the availability of opportunities and all-purpose means. Liberal principles can be applied following the usual guidelines of public inquiry and rules of assessing evidence. Hence, applying liberal principles as a certain simplicity. To illustrate, even if general and comprehensive teleological principles were adopted as political principles of justice, the form of public reasoning they specify tends to be politically unworkable. To conclude, at the first stage of constitutional consensus, the liberal principles of justice, initially accepted reluctantly as a modus vivendi and adopted into a constitution, tend to shift citizens' comprehensive doctrines so they at least accept the principles of a liberal constitution. These principles guarantee certain basic political rights and liberties and establish democratic procedures for moderating the political rivalry and for determining issues of social policy. To this extent, citizens' comprehensive views are reasonable if they were not so before. Simple pluralism moves towards reasonable pluralism, and constitutional consensus is achieved. I'll read that again. Simple pluralism moves towards reasonable pluralism, and constitutional consensus is achieved. And then after the constitutional consensus, you would get to the overlapping consensus, which would be much more broad, much more detailed than the constitutional consensus. Constitutional consensus is like the bare minimum that we can all agree on of what is justice, in our political systems. So it's very narrow, it's very shallow, it does not go into great details about the systems. But once you achieve an overlapping consensus, a sustainable overlapping consensus, then you can start getting into the nitty-gritty details. And that's a consensus about what the right, what a political conception or the conception of what is right is agreed upon, taking out considerations of our unique religious, spiritual, philosophical, psychological biases that we individually have and that we should individually be proud of, This is deep stuff. So basically, consensus is possible. This is what the book says, and there's two types of consensus that we can get to. Oh wow, I've been online for 3 hours almost. Wonderful. How are you guys doing? A little disco going. Reading a thick book, but it's good. It's a good book. It's not the good book, but it's a good book called Political Liberalism. Trying to understand consensus. Let me know, chat. Do you guys think that consensus is possible? And do you think it's important for how our government works and how we interact with each other as a society? And so then the next idea, beyond consensus, is a concept that this John Rawls has in a lecture titled The Idea of Public Reason. So, I'm not going to go deep into this chapter. I really wanted to spend most of the time talking about consensus, which we've just gotten through. And, chat, if you want to provide some of your thoughts, and not even related to what I just read in that chapter, like just your own thoughts coming into this stream, into this interaction on consensus. Like, what is consensus? Is it achievable? And is it important? Let me know. Let me know what you think. political society, and indeed every reasonable and rational agent, whether it be an individual or a family or an association or even a confederation or political societies, has a way of formulating its plans, of putting its end in an order of priority, and of making its decisions accordingly. The way a political society does this is its reason. Its ability to do these things is also its reason. Though in a different sense, it is an intellectual and moral power rooted in the capacities of its human members. Not all reasons are public reasons, as there are the non-public reasons of churches and universities and of many other associations of civil society. In aristocrat and autocrat regimes, when the good of society is considered, this is done not by the public, for it exists at all, but by the rulers, whoever they may be. Public reason is characteristic of a democratic people. It is the reason of its citizens, of those sharing the status of equal citizenship. The subject of their reason is the good of the public, what the political conception of justice requires of society's basic structure of institutions and of the purposes and ends they are to serve. Public reason, then, is public in three ways. As the reason of the citizens as such, it is the reason of the public. Its subject is the good of the public in matters of fundamental justice, and its nature and content is public, being given by the ideals and principles expressed by society's conception of political justice, and conducted open to view on that basis. That public reason should be so understood and honored by citizens is not, of course, a matter of law. As an ideal conception of citizenship for a constitutional democratic regime, it presents how things might be. Taking people as a just and well-ordered society would encourage them to be. It describes what is possible and can be, yet may never be, though no less fundamental for that. The question informs a public reason. The idea of public reason has often discussed and has a long history, and in some form it is widely accepted. My aim here is to try to express it as an acceptable way as part of a political conception of justice that is, broadly speaking, liberal. To begin, in a democratic society, public reason is the reason of equal citizens who, as a collective body, exercise final political and coercive power over one another in enacting laws and amending their constitution. The first point is that the limits imposed by public reason do not apply to all political questions, but only to those involving what we call constitutional essentials and questions of basic justice. This means that political values alone are to settle such fundamental questions as who has the right to vote, or what religions are to be tolerated, or who's to be assured fair equality of opportunity, or to hold property. Another feature of public reason is that its limits do not apply to our personal deliberations or reflections about political questions, or to the reasoning about them by members of associations such as churches and universities, all of which is a vital part of the background culture. Plainly, religious, philosophical, and moral considerations of many kinds may here properly play a role, but the ideal of public reason does hold for citizens when they engage in political advocacy in the public forum, and thus for members of political parties and for candidates in their campaigns and for other groups who support them. It holds equally for how citizens are to vote in elections when constitutional essentials and matters of basic justice are at stake. Thus, the ideal of public reason not only governs the public discourse of elections insofar as the issues involve those fundamental questions, but also how citizens are to cast their vote on those questions. I now turn to what many is a basic difficulty with the idea of public reason, one that makes it seem paradoxical. They ask, Why should citizens, in discussing and voting on the most fundamental political questions, honor the limits of public reason? How can it be either reasonable or rational when basic matters are at stake for citizens to appeal only to public conception of justice and not to the whole truth as they see it? Surely, the most fundamental questions should be settled by appealing to the most important truths. Yet, these may far transcend public reason. When many citizens, by their vote, properly exercise their coercive political power over one another when fundamental questions are at stake, or in the light of what principles and ideals must we exercise that power if our doing so is to be justifiable to others as free and equal? To this question, political liberalism replies, our exercise of political power is proper and hence justifiable only when it is exercised in accordance with the Constitution, the essentials of which all citizens may reasonably be expected to endorse in the light of principles and ideals accepted to them as reasonable and rational. This is the liberal principle of legitimacy. And since the exercise of political power itself must be legitimate, the ideal of citizenship imposes a moral, not a legal duty, the duty of civility, to be able to explain to one another or those of fundamental questions how the principles and policies they advocate and vote for can be supported by the political values of public reason. This duty also involves a willingness to listen to others and a fair-mindedness in deciding when accommodations to their views should reasonably be made. Democracy involves, as I have said, a political relationship between citizens within the basic structure of the society into which they are born and within which they normally lead a complete life. It implies further an equal share in the coercive political power that citizens exercise over one another by voting in other ways. All right, I think we're good for today on this book. I mean, there's just so much more, and a lot of recurring themes and topics throughout this book. So I look forward to digging deeper into this. Always happy to learn more. So, we closed out reading about the importance of open-mindedness and creating your own boundaries and understanding of what a public reason is, and your relationship of your own perspective, your own doctrine to that public reason, and the boundaries of when you will flex to meet that public reason. Interesting stuff. Super interesting. A little heavy for our stream, but I think it's good. I'm happy. I'm happy with how today's stream is going. How about you guys? Let me know. I'm left with one. There's probably Tef lurking too. Thanks for the lurk, Tef. Yeah, I wonder if these guys behind me have come any closer to the consensus that they're looking for. Dang, it's almost 7 o'clock. I did have a long stream tonight. How long did I go? A little over 3 hours. It's pretty good. Talking about consensus for 3 hours. I think that we can draw a consensus that, yeah, that's a pretty deep dive. That's a pretty deep dive there. I'm happy with what I've learned today. And I look forward to continuing my conversation, with my mentors who are actually quite skeptical that a consensus is possible. And so what I'm thinking now, given what I just read here, and kind of the ideas of consensus I had prior to this, I always felt like, particularly in the case of legislators who are trying to write laws with this general public. Oh, thank you, Tef. Thanks for looking out for my appetite. It was you, Lurkin. I knew it was you. Did you hear me? Did you hear me call you a lurker? I just had a big lunch right before I started streaming. So my dinner will probably come in like 3 or 4 hours. I gotta go home and cook it. But yeah, I'll have myself a nice dinner. Me and Bitcoin will have a nice dinner. Speaking of, I can't believe that Bitcoin hasn't come up. He's been sleeping. He's been taking a hard nap up front. It's funny, when we got into the office, Bitcoin was like obsessing about getting a treat. And then, as soon as we get inside, he like sat on the couch and then he started cuddling up. And next thing I know, he like forgot all about his treat. And he still hasn't come for it. His treats are over here on this side. He still never came for it. So he's catching up on them Z's. Catching up on them Z's. All right, so here's the innovative idea. I always thought that legislators, like right now, they have this forum where you can call them on the phone, you can write an email to them, and you can even send them a postcard. And you could tell them, hey, I want you to support this law, or I want you to support this, or I want you to integrate, these issues into your lawmaking session this year. And these lawmakers are supposed to collect all of those letters, and they're supposed to make decisions based off those letters. And like, I've been in those forums before. I've hosted civic engagement events where we wrote postcards and taught people how to make phone calls, and it felt futile. It felt useless. And I was like, this is what they're supposed to be using to write our laws. And what they are listening to? They're listening to the lobbyists. They're listening to the corporations that are telling them, oh, this is how you should do it. Because, a lobbyist or corporation that's providing data and providing information about, businesses that's the backbone of our cash flow in society and how we exchange value with each other, they oftentimes prioritize the comments and the feedback and the consensus, whatever consensus that is, a corporation knowing what's good for us. They prioritize that feedback versus, they may have like over 1,000 letters from citizens. How are they gonna like process all of that information? And so I'm thinking, we're in an age now where people are questioning corporate motives of what's being done with our data online. Marketers are able to like create profiles to the T of who we are as people, who we are as consumers, what drives us, what motivates us, what we're attracted to, what we value in life. And they use that information to sell us products, right? That's, you know, like the big grunt on the internet right now is that big data is being used kind of against us. And I'm wondering, why the heck can't we use that same technology, that same concept, to better understand some type of true consensus, some type of public reason, like what I just read in this book. And man, if I was a politician, I was telling my friend, I was like, AOC, who is also on Twitch. AOC is on Twitch. She twitches about every week or so. She does live interviews. She just talks to the camera. It's really cool. And I think it's great, you know, that she's taking those steps forward to connecting with the future. And just like the internet and technology is better connecting us, it could be also used to better understand this public reason and better understand consensus, or what do they call it? Overlapping consensus. Overlapping consensus. I don't know. What do you think about that? What do you guys think about that? Do you guys think that's possible? Do you think that politicians such as AOC could make a call out for her constituents to answer a survey, and then she could actually process the answers and come up with some type of understanding, and not just for her to come up with the understanding or any other lawmaker that's utilizing these techniques, not only for them to understand the consensus or the overlapping consensus of their constituency, but also for those citizens, those individuals, to understand their own doctrine within the whole. And in doing that, they will better understand themselves and better understand their own boundaries and their own values within that public reason. That could be super empowering. Oh my God, mind blown. I'm stoked. I'm stoked. Next time AOC goes live on Twitch, I'm gonna be there. I mean, I would love to get more engaged with what she's doing, and because I feel like of politicians, she's the most poised to take on new technologies, new techniques of understanding consensus, because it is possible. Consensus is possible. Oh, Tef, are you the fruit Nazi? Making sure I eat fruit before I leave? I don't have any fruit here. Actually, you know what? I do have some fruit. I have a couple pieces of that jackfruit cake left in my fridge. Exactly. So, Tef, you brought up a good example. You said it's possible, just like how Reddit played with stocks the other day. It is possible for a citizen to use the consensus to make stuff happen. It is. It's possible. It's so fucking possible. And why we're not doing it, why our politicians in the United States of America are still accepting feedback from their constituents through postcards and phone calls versus having like online surveys, regular engagement, similar to this type of engagement on Twitch or whatever platform they want to use, to understand that consensus and understand what people want to do. Obviously, like the whole Reddit story with GameStop is a really great example of this community of people that all agreed upon a consensus. They agreed upon who the bad guy was going to be, what they were going to do to expose vulnerabilities for that bad guy, and work together. Now, I'm not saying that all the ills in the world will be solved with a case or a story exactly similar to that. But yeah, we'll see. Next time AOC is online, I'm going to start doing the work. I think it'd be very cool. Tef, what are you still doing up? Very, very late at night. You need to go to bed so that way tomorrow you can be awake for our tea talks. because I'd love to see you at the virtual tea house tomorrow. Tef, how did you like our session today? Getting pretty heavy, huh? I'm always here to bring the heavy. I'm always here to bring the heavy. Non-stop heavy. You know who I've been missing lately is Snake Eye. He's always got good feedback and good perspectives, as well as fart jokes. Yeah, you need to sleep in the middle of the day, then you can make it to detox. Well, hey man, as long as you've got like the time to do that, and you also have like the midday darkness or quiet to allow you to sleep, then yeah, you can do it. You can do it. But yeah, we'd love to see you at Tea Talks. It's always fun. Always fun to have you there. Moderating and helping out, holding down the culture, holding down the public reason, as our friend John Rawls would say. I'm curious to know like what this guy looks like and sounds like. I'm gonna look up some videos of him, because this book was written in 1993, so it's not, he's not like an archaic political philosopher. He's oh yeah. Let's see if we can find a cool video we can watch. Short one. That's smart.
Related how to create a fair society. When we do this, we are forming a theory of justice. John Rawls' book titled A Theory of Justice puts forth a fair method of producing distributive shares and outcomes. The moral force behind the principles in a theory of justice are based on a hypothetical contract. By emphasizing contracts over consequences, the theory tries to avoid the moral dilemma of treating moral agents as a means to an end. Instead of using the model of an actual contract, like the United States Constitution, the theory uses the concept of a hypothetical contract, which is more resistant to the exploitation of knowledge and bargaining power. The theory of justice asks us to put ourselves behind a veil of ignorance as a thought experiment. Behind the veil, we eliminate our personal features and imagine ourselves in a conscious state before we were born. This state, known as the original position, tries to bring us closer to a position of equality. In this position, we should ask ourselves, what sort of society would I want to be born into? This draws on a sort of joint rationality and helps us to find common ground. The third component of the theory of justice can be thought of as speculation about what would be chosen by rational actors in the original position. John Rawls believes in the original position the difference principle, a principle in which inequality is allowed only when it benefits the least fortunate, would be chosen. He also believes that it is not moral to base distributive shares on arbitrary factors and uses this principle to handle various objections to the difference principle. A system based solely on merit, for example, while using what seems to be a non-arbitrary system of distributive shares based on effort or contribution, still succumbs to the arbitrariness of the genetic lottery of talents and the societal lottery of those talents being currently valued. Effort itself is also affected by factors like the arbitrariness of being the firstborn. The natural distribution, says Rawls, is neither just nor unjust, nor is it unjust that persons are born into society at some particular position. These are simply natural facts. What is just and unjust is the way that institutions deal with these facts.
Oh, so there's that. That wasn't necessarily on this political liberalism. That was on his... I mean, is he... Is this, I don't even know if, it seems that all these videos are just like photos of him. Oh, because he's passed away. He passed away in 2002. Yeah, he'd be 100 years old now if he was still alive, which meant he wrote this book shortly before he passed. Interesting. Interesting. Well, good to learn. Good to learn something new. So, yeah, Tef, you don't believe anything Americans do? Or you question everything Americans do? I hope you don't question what I do. I'm just full of love. Full of so much love. But you're friends with so many Americans, Tef. You're constantly questioning what your friends do? That's funny. Well, I think I've only got you here, Tef. Should I go raid someplace, or are you going to sleep? And yeah, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope. I will see you guys tomorrow for Tea Talks. We'll have some fun. We need some fun. I've been pretty serious on the stream today, especially. So it'll be good to have some fun tomorrow. So I'll see you guys tomorrow.